I want to get into what happened to you after you left Abu Ghraib. As I understand, you wanted to be court-martialed.
Correct.
You sought a court-martial.
Yes, we did.
Why would you seek a court-martial? I don't know any soldier out there other than war resistors who are making a political statement who want to seek a court-martial. Why would you seek that?
Because they knew, they being Rumsfeld, Sanchez, Miller, Cheney, they all knew the story that they were promoting and force-feeding to the American people was a lie. I knew it was a lie. I knew they knew that I didn't know anything about this. And I knew not from the beginning, honestly, because I trusted the system. I continued to hang on to the truth is going to prevail, the truth is going to come out. I was honest with General Taguba. You know, it was just, I trusted the system. And then when the system betrayed me intentionally, I knew. And I said to the lawyer, let him court-martial me. Bring me into a courtroom. And the reason they didn't was because they didn't want to be confronted with the truth. They did not, and to this day, there hasn't been anyone in the chain of command who, if they were so sure of how bad I was, any one of them could have called me into their office, summoned me into their office, locked my heels, and relieved me, fired me, chewed me out. There was no discussion whatsoever. Mm-hmm. The biggest coward in all of this is General Helmsley, then Lieutenant General Helmsley. He's a Major General now, but he was serving as the Chief of the Army Reserves. And he dealt with me through form letters to include, you know how I found out that I'd been relieved of my command in May of 2004? A reporter from the Pentagon press briefing called me and told me, this is cowardice at its worst and most obvious. And it's so easy to accuse and point fingers when you don't think anybody's there to defend themselves, but I'm here and I'm defending myself and I'm defending the actions of my soldiers. I asked for a court-martial. We asked for a court-martial and they refused to give it to us.
So how do you end up retiring as a colonel instead of a brigadier general?
Well, in order to demote me, they would have had to give me a court-martial. There would have had to be something like a plea bargain or something, a reprimand, to reduce me. With my full understanding and maybe not full agreement, but my full understanding of the basis for it. But what they got the president to do was to exercise a privilege, and he vacated my promotion. And this was used for battlefield commissions. So you might have a sergeant or a corporal or a private that is in a firefight, finds himself the most senior surviving person, and they're given a commission so they can take command of the organization. The leadership has all been eliminated or killed or wounded. So they would give them what they called a battlefield commission, and a sergeant could become a lieutenant or a captain, and then after the war, these promotions were vacated and they were returned to their original rank. And that provision remains on the books. It's a privilege for the president.
Your demotion came directly from the President of the United States.
Yes. He vacated my promotion based on a recommendation from the Vice President and the Secretary of Defense.
And there's been no congressional investigation into this, nothing that...
Well, there's been, as Tony Snow and the previous White House Press Secretary Scott McClellan have said repeatedly, there were 17 investigations, yes, and every one of them were done under the control of the then Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. And Rumsfeld was wielding a big stick. And he told them before the investigations even got underway, I'm sure of it. You know, nobody sat down with me and said, this is what Rumsfeld wants. But they understood. And they also understood, more importantly, that if you cross Donald Rumsfeld, you will live to pay for it.
Do you feel you've lived to pay for it?
I think that they chose the wrong target, honestly. I think that they had this idea that I would roll over, that I would do the classic women things, weep, plead. They didn't have any idea who I was or what I was capable of doing or how I would respond. However, I will tell you this, knowing soldiers and then afterwards looking into some of the information about the background about these 7 soldiers seen in some of those photographs, every one of them, to a soldier, every one of them has something that would be in their military intelligence file there, because they all had security clearances, that could be exploited. Sergeant Grainer was cross-leveled into the 372nd Military Police Company. He was in a unit as a mechanic out in Pennsylvania, but he was working as a military policeman in the unit. He'd been he had prior service in the Marine Corps, and his specialty was as a mechanic in the Marine Corps. So he always holds that military occupational skill, MOS. He was trained in the Army Reserves as an MP, and he was working as a prison guard in a prison facility in Pennsylvania. So when the units were preparing to be mobilized and deploy, Charles Grainer, Sergeant Grainer, was cross-leveled from his unit into the 372nd Military Police Company as a mechanic. And the reason he was cross-leveled into that vacant position as a mechanic is because his clearance was suspended. His security clearance was suspended. He had an opportunity, and he was in the process of responding to those questions in order to get his clearance restored so he could continue working as an MP in his unit when he was mobilized and sent to this other unit, the 372nd. But anyway, the reason that's important is because when he got there, they were looking through his file. They saw that he was trained and qualified as an MP. It was an MP unit. They were short MPs. It was more difficult to fill a position with an MP than it was for a mechanic. So they kind of eliminated that requirement of his security clearance and put him in a position in the unit as an MP.
Where he would have otherwise been required to have this security clearance.
That's right. A general officer who was validating the unit just, I guess, imagined his pen to be a magic wand and just said, we're going to put him in this position anyway.
As we refer to it, pencil whipping.
Right. And each one of them had not a skeleton in their closet, but something unusual in their background that perhaps people thought, we can exploit this and that will buy their silence, or will, leverage. I don't want to say that they threatened them with exposing a particular aspect of their background, but that they were planning to use this as a vulnerability or leverage if it ever came out. Otherwise, how do all of these people end up, you talk about star-crossed, how do these 7 people end up in this scenario in cell block 1A on the night shift otherwise, if it wasn't intentional? The long reach of fate, I find that doubtful. But every one of these soldiers was fairly typical of soldiers you would find in the Army Reserves or the National Guard. They get into this situation out at Abu Ghraib. It is unfair for them to have been treated the way they were, tried and convicted and found guilty by the World Court before any one of them set foot in a courtroom for anything. And meanwhile, their commander is saying, give me a voice, give me a court-martial, and the system is saying, ignore her. I mean, she's going to come in there and she's going to tell the truth, and she's a general officer, people are going to believe her. We have to keep her out of a courtroom. And so they managed to do that. And then they managed to silence me, or they thought they had, by saying, the president is vacating your promotion. And add insult to injury, if you can imagine them finding another way to do it. He signed it on the Friday before the Saturday when it would have been too late.
Ms. Karpinski continues to travel across the country speaking out about her experience, despite the Bush administration's attempt to silence her with a demotion. This has been Jeff Millard reporting for Truthout.org.